Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, this is Jeremy Smith. I've not been living under a rock lately. I know that there's been lots of camera announcements. Sony's announced the ZV-E10 Mark II, Canon's released the R1 and the R5 Mark II, and of course Nikon has released the Z6III. Now, normally guys, this sort of entry to mid-level full-frame camera range is not my preferred range of camera. I usually favor the higher res bodies, but the Z6III had something about it that caught my eye. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit on this intro. Go ahead and skip forward to the timestamp on screen if you want to go ahead and get straight into the test. But for those of you guys that are not aware, mirrorless cameras still have one big area where they struggle against the DSLR. And this is kind of like the final frontier for mirrorless cameras as far as I'm concerned. And that is how these cameras handle being able to autofocus in low light when you have a small aperture selected. So let me give you guys a scenario. Let's say that you are an event shooter. Let's say you're shooting something like a wedding reception. And let's just say that you are going to be photographing small groups of people. You're going to be photographing individuals and you want to have more depth of field even for that because you're trying to show off this festive environment they're in. So you're using a smaller aperture. You're using something like f5.6 or f8 or maybe even f11. And you still want to have the advantage of a mirrorless camera. You want to be able to have it do constant, continuous focus tracking and constant, eye detection and face detection and all those fun things. But your camera continues to just hunt for focus. And so the reason why this happens is because unlike a DSLR, on a mirrorless camera, whenever you choose a small aperture, the camera automatically sets the aperture at that time. On a DSLR camera, you're shooting wide open aperture, and then right before the image is captured, the camera stops down to the small aperture and takes the photograph, and then it widens up again. But on a mirrorless camera, since this small aperture is selected on the front end, your camera is actually trying to do focus tracking and everything while it's set to a small aperture and you're in low light. So if you've got f8 selected, you're already at f8, and because you don't have very much light there to work with, the camera is going to really struggle. For whatever reason though, the Nikon Z6III does not suffer from this issue. Now, I was not expecting to see this on a camera at this level first. But yeah, after reading a lot of Facebook posts, I noticed a lot of people were going out and demoing this camera at different Nikon events across the country. And anyways, shout out to Neil. Some days I can say your last name, some days I can't. So anyways, but shout out to Neil for his Facebook post. And I saw that post and I thought, he spoke about how he noticed how the Z6III could track under these conditions like nothing he'd ever seen. So naturally I had to go out and test this, and I made a little quick rudimentary video to post on Facebook. And of course I wanted to do a more formal test. Neil is like a lot of photographers in the sense that he uses this small LED, light panel on his camera whenever he's shooting under these conditions to try to give the camera some light to be able to see out of focus. Another thing that I've been talking with other photographers about is how the AF assist beam does not work on a mirrorless camera properly. And anyways, there's a lot of other stuff I could get into right now. But I actually have been talking with Nikon about this too. And anyways, I had to give them my praise for doing whatever they did to the Z6III to make it perform better under these conditions. So anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and just show you how this works. And I'm going to compare this against a Sony A1 because that's the camera I had around to test at the time and compare to. But I also tested this camera up against a Sony A9 III in my first rudimentary test. And we saw the same exact struggle with the A9 III that we saw with the A1. But yeah, the Z6III performs way better. I suspect the Z6III performs better because somehow Nikon's managed to reduce the read noise perhaps from the image sensor. Maybe the partially stacked design has something to do with that. But yeah, if the camera has a cleaner signal, maybe it can discern faces because there's not as much noise. I have no idea what's going on, but at any rate, it works very well. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this, and I'll show you how the Z6III just blew my socks off in this area. So here we are under some fairly favorable shooting conditions. We're shooting at f4, 800 ISO, 1/60th of a second. And of course we have no issues with any type of tracking. We can toggle between our subject's eyes, no issue. But this is where things get different. If we're going to shoot some type of indoor event like a wedding reception or something like that, and we're going to be using flash and we're using a smaller aperture, like say for example f8 or so, or f5, 6, and let's say the lighting conditions are much dimmer than this, that's where we start to run into some issues. So first of all, let's make it properly dark in here. There we go. Oh my goodness, but look at that. What the heck? It's pitch black, and somehow the camera is still like detecting her eyes even now. I'm not understanding how this camera works this way. Okay, we're going to go to f8, and you can definitely tell it's properly dark because we have to go way high on the ISO now. And there we go. You guys can see. And it struggles a little bit at first, but then it finds it, and we've got her. No issues. We can even still toggle back and forth. You know, the camera, I mean, it does really, really well detecting those eyes. And yeah, so now let's go ahead and see how the Sony does. I'm going to be using a Sony A1. Although I did, as I mentioned previously, I did use the A9 III for this as well. And it's not like it really fared any better, but let's go ahead and give the A1 a go here. Okay, so here we are with the A1. And despite the A1 not having Sony's AI chip, you can see it still stays with the subject pretty well. Now initially, a lot of times it's not quite as sticky as the cameras with the AI chip, but it still gets the job done. But here's the area where things get drastically different. That's whenever things get dark. So we'll make it properly dark again, like that, and here we go. So already the struggle begins. Let's go ahead and go to f8, and we'll go up to the same 64,000 ISO. We were on the Nikon, and well, here we go. You guys can pretty much see what happens. And yeah, so I'm not sure what Nikon did to the Z6III. As I mentioned, even cameras like the Z8 and Z9 struggle in these same scenarios. The Sony A9 III with its AI chip does do a bit better job of that initial subject acquisition, but when it gets dark at small aperture, it also struggles. So yeah, I mean, once again, kudos to Nikon for whatever they did to the Z6III. Hopefully this is a good sign for other mirrorless cameras to come. We'll have to keep an eye on firmware updates and everything. Maybe there will be things to come out to affect the performance of the Z8 and Z9 as well. So some parting comments on the Z6III. I definitely like the feel of this camera. You know, if you're into that larger, more traditional feel, I think this is really, really nice. It definitely feels a lot more like the Nikon Z8. It doesn't feel like the early Z models quite as much. It's definitely deeper here through the grip. It's more rounded. And also I like how the sort of prism area doesn't have that same look to it. You know, in the previous Nikon models, they were set up to where this area was much, much higher. Honestly, it looked kind of strange. Not that camera aesthetics really matter that much to me, but I like how it's much lower profile through here, and it's just more streamlined looking, so I do like that. I'm also you know, I have to say I'm not team flip out screen. I don't care for this on a camera like this. Although Nikon has put a lot more emphasis on the video aspects of this, I definitely wish other companies would implement Sony's recent design where you have a tilting and flip out screen. So yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of this just because of how it blocks ports and things like that when you're trying to flip out. But still very, very solid feeling camera. more action oriented than what I would normally use, and you know, doesn't have, you know, the higher resolution, but still a solid camera at this range. Obviously those features I just described are for a different range of camera, like this camera's big brother, the Z8, for example. But anyways, we'll talk about more aspects of the camera in a future video. Definitely be sure to write me in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and don't forget to subscribe for all the latest updates. As I mentioned at the top of this video, there's a lot of new cameras out now, and I definitely will begin to do all the testing on those and bring you guys interesting videos as I come across interesting features on the newer models. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.